Hello everyone, welcome to today's session, Digitising the Future, How Connected Construction Accelerates EV Charging Deployment. My name's Jonathan Spencer-Jones, Specialist Writer for Smart Energy International and your moderator for today's event, which is hosted in partnership with Smart Energy International and Site Tracker. With the rapid spike in electric vehicles globally, the need for an efficient and reliable charging infrastructure is becoming increasingly urgent. According to the European EV Charging Infrastructure Masterplan, 6.8 million chargers must be in place by 2030. As a result, utilities are experiencing immense pressure to make essential upgrades to their transmission infrastructures and at the same time connect an ever-growing list of charging assets to the grid. And with the International Energy Agency reporting the average time to build clean energy infrastructure at over a decade, what can developers, EPCs and utilities do to collectively speed up the process across planning, design and construction to get the assets up and running faster? Today we've gathered a group of experts from EV charging to discuss just that, how the connected construction solutions are accelerating EV charging deployments. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests. First, Sebastian Heimas, Head of Project Controls at Evive Charging Network. Evive is an EV charge point operator dedicated to establishing a network of rapid and ultra-rapid EV charging stations, all powered by 100% renewable energy. He brings extensive experience in site tracker implementation, having successfully introduced the software into 3 different businesses within the telecoms and EV sectors. Sebastian was also among the first users of the system in the UK, with his initial engagement dating back to 2017 with BT Street Hub. Lynn Toogood is Chief Operating Officer of Connected Curb. Before joining the EV charging infrastructure world in November 2021, Lynn led the network team that was instrumental in rolling out the first 4G emergency services and 5G network in the UK. She's now investing this experience and formidable enthusiasm to drive massive improvements in the availability of EV charging points across the UK and beyond, along with exploring opportunities to collaborate with other innovative and sustainable infrastructure innovators. And Mathieu Michel, Sales Engineer with Site Tracker, has over 10 years working across various industries. A quick thinker and problem solver, he's always been interested in technology and how it's used to innovate and create new opportunities. And being analytical, open-minded, he likes to understand how things work and fit together. His job gives him the opportunity to understand companies' IT environments and issues to help them tackle their challenges and bring the appropriate solution. He's also had the opportunity to work with different people with different cultures, Latin America, across Europe and Asia, which helps to grow as a professional and develop his integration to the environment. Before I start the discussion, please note today's session is being recorded and will be available on demand on www.smartenergy.com. And we would like to hear from you during the course of the conversation and answer any burning questions that you have. And you can send that via the box on the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. And should time allow, we'll respond to as many as possible, or alternatively follow up afterwards. So I'd like to start by asking each of you to briefly introduce your organization's role in the EV charging ecosystem. And perhaps Lynn, you'd like to start?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, at Connected Curb, we deploy charging infrastructure in large scale across whole counties. So where there's thousands of chargers required to facilitate the confidence really for people to migrate and to invest in electric vehicles. So we primarily deploy AC charging in 7 and 22 kilowatt, and our priority is to make charging affordable and accessible and convenient for everyone. So focusing on people who don't have the convenience of a driveway, we deploy EV chargers for residents who live in maybe terrace houses or multi-dwelling units. In addition, we also collaborate with IoT providers, so we deploy parking sensors and air quality sensors, and are looking at all sorts of other collaborations with different IoT providers along the way. That's me, Jonathan.
Sebastian, would you like to follow?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. So I work for Revive. We're a charge point operator in the UK. The chargers that we install at the slightly higher end, so we sort of 75 kilowatt up to 150 kilowatt, the sort of chargers that would charge your car in about 20 minutes or so and give you a decent amount. So we purchase the chargers, we install them, obtain the point of connections, and then we operate and maintain those chargers all the way across the UK. We've got a couple of large clients that we work with Green King and the Peel Group. We've got about 200 live chargers at the moment, and an ambitious deployment program for 2024.
Okay, thank you. And Matt?
Sure. So SiteTracker is a SaaS solution which is like a project site asset management system, and we assist companies to manage their portfolio of EV stations, but also help them to have a standardization in the process of deployments and to manage projects. There's a huge challenges that those companies need to tackle. We'll talk about it, but basically SiteTracker help them to engage, forecast, and deploy faster through a project management system.
Okay, thank you. Let's get straight in and start talking about the current state of EV charging infrastructure across Europe. And I mentioned in my introduction the exciting or perhaps daunting goal, and would like to get your perspectives on that and how you would describe the current state of EV charging across the region. Lynn, if you'd like to start that, please.
I moved from telecoms into EV charging 2 years ago, and what's been an interesting observation for me is last year there was a lot more momentum than this year. So last year there was quite a clear route from government from the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles to really part fund projects, and that gave a lot of confidence to the market and the investor community to allow us to really deploy programs and see that kind of route to deploying over a period of time and moving to models that were fully funded. That's really slowed down this year. The transition from OZEV to the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund has all but stopped progress in the market. So it's a real concern, because what that's done is it's taken some confidence out of the market. So whereas last year we started deploying across one county, we had 7,000 chargers, another county 10,000 chargers, and invested heavily in site selection software that would really help us understand the best places to put chargers. The absolute key for me is deploying chargers and understanding where the best place to deploy them from an economic point of view, but also understanding how do you drive utilization in areas that may not seem that economic. But the most important way to really validate that is then to have actual utilization, so that you can keep validating those decisions and not just have a roadmap that you develop on day one and then 5 years later it's exactly the same. And what I'm seeing is, whereas there is still progress being made, it's just not fast enough.
And Sebastian, what about your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, Lynn, and I come from a similar background with telecoms as well. I think one of the stats I read the other week is that the UK is the same time last year we've increased by about 40% with the amount of charges in the UK. So clearly, the pace that these charges are getting put in is fast. That said, we are still seeing so many of the same problems that I've faced in telecoms over the last 7 years or so. That when you're deploying in the UK, delays and council issues, and not enough being done, I think, as Lynn pointed out, to help us get these charges in the ground. It's I think you mentioned it at the start, Jonathan. The sort of infrastructure that there is available in the UK at the moment with the power isn't right in the right place at the moment to support this rollout. It can't often when we go to deploy in certain areas, the power's not there. And when we do try and put the power in, it's the costs to deploy 2-3 miles potentially of power cables is so prohibitive. So long way to go, and very challenging environment.
I just wanted to add to that, Jonathan, in that the actual physical doing of the deploying is not difficult. It's there's lots of infrastructure deployment at the moment in the UK, whether it's mobile, small cells, fibre, EV charging. But there's some really good work being done by Charge UK on barrier busting. And again, a similar effort was put through in telco. There was always barrier busting team. And the key barriers are definitely power. There's a lot of charging infrastructure being deployed that doesn't have power to it. And there are challenges there. And National Grid have been really forthcoming in trying to work through what those challenges are. But there's also a real, there's a huge appetite from charging infrastructure providers like Connected Curb to actually deploy more infrastructure. But there are, when you're certainly in the public sector, you're working with departments, say if you're doing leases, you're working with the same legal departments that are doing lots of other stuff in the councils, and you're working with people who have a lot of other constraints on their time. So it's actually really working at how do you get the right, more people in and the right capabilities to really support this effort in sort of a real hothouse way, rather than just trying to have this huge appetite for all these big contracts and then all of a sudden, really squeeze through a very small set of resources.
Right.
Just to add on this, what is interesting is in 2022, there was actually 26 million electric vehicle actually on the roads. Up to 60% was actually related to 2021. So we can see the market is actually exploding. And there is a report there saying that just in the EU, they will need 3.4 million operational public charging by 2023 to follow actually this trend and this need to charge their vehicle. So obviously, in terms of deployment, but also in terms of support, in terms of maintenance, there are lots that will need to be done.
And you've talked a bit about the challenges, and just to talk a little bit more maybe about upfront activities like site selection. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lynn?
Yeah, definitely. One of the Connected Curbs, part of our reason for being is to make charging accessible. And where the industry is at the moment is there's a real balance between, okay, putting chargers in areas that are going to be utilized, and therefore there's frankly a business case for it, and then also putting chargers in areas where the utilization might not be so high, because otherwise you're deploying a very uneven network. So from a site selection point of view, it's really important, and in a lot of our contracts there's a real requirement, and we work with councils to actually put chargers in places that economically may not be make that much sense. And as far as public funding goes, a lot of the really profitable sites, most of those sites, you can deploy those and they have a business case for it. They don't need to be funded, going by the government. But there are lots of areas, little bit similar to the mobile network when 99% of the population were covered. That really was only 75% of the land mass, and with 1% of people being in 25% of the geography, that's a really difficult business case. So I think from a barrier point of view, there's work that needs to be done in focusing public funds in areas that there may not be a business case, and really understanding then where there is a business case, working on that balance rather than it just being one-dimensional. For me, that site selection is really important. Needs to bring in an awful lot of bits of data to help you get there, but again, super important to then validate those selections, constantly validate them, to make sure you're putting them in the right place in the first place, so that you make better selections next time.
And is that similar for Revive, Sebastian?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, we place an enormous amount of importance on selecting those sites. As I said, the charges that we put in there, the sort of 75, 100 kilowatt, 150 kilowatt charges, they're phenomenally expensive, and we need to make sure that we select the right sites for those. We don't put the sites onto sort of council grounds. It's we work with a number of private operators, so it's putting it into car parks, that sort of thing, and private grounds. But I think the key with us is to try and be as data driven as possible when we're making our site selections. We use Site Tracker for all of that. We I suppose look at some basic things such as charger saturation in an area. Are our chargers going to be used? For us, it's very much about that business case, not so much as looking at with Lynn saying that it's try to actually get that side of it, putting them into places where everyone can then access them. But for us, it's about are people going to use them? Are we going to make money on these sites? Is it going to be worthwhile us investing in them? So it's a key part of the process, that's for sure.
And Matt, what are your other Site Tracker customers saying?
Yeah, as they were mentioning, what we see is a trend of doing actually more site survey is actually quite important to go on site and understand, if it's actually viable to get a station somewhere, to be able to understand if the electric grid actually will be able to supply electricity to those new stations. So what we see is way more a process where actually there's more site survey, sending people on site, making sure we have the right information, and from those cases, moving this to a deployment or not. But obviously the projection of the cost is going to be extremely important indeed.
And just turning to another aspect, the construction, Sebastian, what about getting field crews and assets to the right place at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Lynn said earlier, the actual install of the sites is relatively straightforward. Once we've got permission to be there and we know that we can get the power in the ground, actually installing these, digging them up, and is pretty straightforward. I think some of the basic deployment issues that we see are more around things like the connectivity of the site, 4G, 3G, 5G on the site. All of our chargers need to connect to the pay terminals, and we do that remotely. So if there's no signal in the area, that can be a bit of a problem for us. So we do face problems with with DNO and the mapping that they provide in terms of what we find when we turn up on site. It's one thing to do site visits, actually get that, but often we don't know what we're going to find until we actually break ground, which again can be quite difficult when we're deploying. Yeah, I think in terms of we try and use as much technology we can when we're deploying our sites, using our subcontractors and getting them on our systems, issuing out work as automatically as we can, that sort of thing.
Okay, and let's also talk about charger up, and thinking about factors like quality of the equipment, to quality of the installation, to corrective and preventive maintenance. What are some of the best practices here, and perhaps differences in approaches to urban versus rural areas, public versus fleet programs? Lynn, would you like to start with that one?
When I first joined Connected Curb, the first thing I did was put myself on second line support, because I really wanted to understand. I think having invested a lot of time looking at what was going on in the EV sector, it was very clear to me that service was not necessarily a priority for operators. And so I put myself on second line support, still am, and answered phones to customers and really got to understand what the experience was like, but the reliability of the hardware and the software interfaces. 100 years ago, I studied computer science when we had floppy disks. So I've been sort of in the kind of software and systems integration world for a very long time. So I always approach, even though I love being a physical builder and building infrastructure, I always approach it from a data point of view and really understanding what's going on. So actually understanding physically what was happening then meant we could trace back to, okay, what's going on? Where do we need to improve things? Where can we be proactive? And putting customer service in place. And your objective as an operator is to have really brilliant hardware so people never have to call you, and to have software tools that are intuitive and that people can self-serve. That's your priority. So that's really, from an operator point of view, where you really need your focus to be. Secondary to that is when a customer does have to call you, you want it to be a fabulous experience. You want it to be amazing. You don't want them to be getting on social media saying how rubbish it was. And so that, for me, from a customer service point of view, is a priority. In parallel with that, then, we really focused on making sure we were troubleshooting and understanding what was going on. The biggest issue you've got in EV, from my perspective, is there's no operators are really making money. As Sebastian said, the equipment is expensive, the cost of input deploying it is expensive, and the return on investment, is 8+ years, probably in a lot of cases. So what you need to do is make sure that your costs as you're deploying are really, and maintaining it, are as lean as possible. So again, my priority has always been to make sure there's great customer service, but make sure we're constantly monitoring, constantly improving. And fortunately, we design and manufacture our own equipment, so we can keep folding all those learnings back in and constantly improving. But you have to do it as virtually as possible. Going to site, even whether you're doing a survey or you're fixing stuff, is expensive. It's you've got miles, you've got possibility of accidents. So for me, I virtualize as much as absolutely possible and limit the amount of time people have to go to site, because that's where there's significant cost, and you really only want to be managing exceptions. But ultimately, your entire company must be focused on, everyone in the company must be part of customer service, in my view, and must be part of that view. I use our chargers wherever I possibly can, and I always feedback on the experience so we can continuously be improving it. So yeah, the industry has a way to go on reliability of charge points, but that absolutely has to be where the focus is, not just to deploy as much as possible and hope for the best.
And Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, what we see is that the market is a race. It's a race to whom is going to be able to claim to have more EV charging points installed, and claim, in the future that by the end of the year we have 30% more and so on. But obviously what we see is there was a study in France for 2022 that actually 27% of all the stations actually were inactive, or there's actually an issue, which is actually a big problem. So we need to, as Lynn mentioned, is as a consumer, when I go to a station, I want to make sure that the station works. I want to make sure that to turn 27 times to find something that is actually, be able to charge my vehicle, because I might be in a hurry and everything. Actually, in the Nordics, in Sweden, Denmark, and so on, by law, those countries actually force the CPOs, the charging point operator, to do at least 2 or 3 maintenance a year, and they need to be able to report on this. And anyone, as in the public, when it's actually in the street, to be able to report a case and say something doesn't work and everything. So obviously the challenge is to be able to reduce this amount of like disconnected or station that actually doesn't work, but also to reduce the number of tickets claim that something doesn't work. And it's one of the biggest challenge, because obviously I would prefer, or I would tend to and lead to a company that offers uptime, of the station. They're actually very good, than actually have a bad experience with a charger that doesn't work, because it stick to your mind and you lose market and you lose confidence, and it actually has a big impact on the company.
Right. And another topic necessary across these phases is collaboration. And why is that so critical to charging deployments, and how can collaboration between different stakeholders, government agencies, utilities, property owners, subcontractors, manufacturers, accelerate the deployment of charging infrastructure? Can you share examples of successful collaboration models or tools that have led to faster deployment, Sebastian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts with all of this. We speak to multiple, council departments. We have design departments. We've got multiple subcontractors, different teams doing on-site and off-site works, different commissioning teams. People putting kit onto the site, and then obviously when they're up and running. So I think that for me, this comes back to Site Tracker. One of the biggest. We've been live about 4 months now with Site Tracker, and I think the ability for it to to move things further down the line as quickly as possible, talking between the different teams, that's certainly a big success story for us. And the same with our subcontractors. When we do have people in the field, I agree. We try not to have people boots on the ground as often as possible. Where we can remotely fix these sites, that's clearly the key. But when we do have people in the field, we have them using our devices, using our systems, uploading photos immediately into our system, answering questions from the app straight into Site Tracker, so that we can resolve these as quickly as possible. I think in the new year, we've got a number of major contractors that we want to be using our system and only our system when they're installing them, when they're fixing them, when they're upgrading them, swapping out parts, etc. Yeah, I mean, Site Tracker certainly helped with the speed at which we can move anything through the process and fix our sites and get them live.
I realise this is a webinar that's sponsored by Site Tracker, but I really wanted to second that. Years ago, and a lot of infrastructure projects I worked on was you literally were deploying stuff, managing it on a spreadsheet, and sitting there late at night doing VLOOKUPs. And I brought Site Tracker in as when I was building a network. And what it does, I mean, it is an exceptionally sophisticated piece of software, so you can use as much or as little as you want. But what it does allow you to do, you have to be efficient at what you're doing. And therefore, it allows you to track the workflow that you're doing, people to be able to see it all virtually, to be able to develop it as you go. And at any one point in time, you can see where every single one of your sites are in the project life cycle. And you can then do a lot of benchmarking and a lot of analysis that says, okay, which was the best, which was the fastest, why is it the fastest, which was the slowest, what happened, how do you actually constantly analyze the data to bring the deployment timeframes. Somebody actually in the question was saying about why is the business case for EVs not there on its own without government funding. Government funding, I mean, there is a piece of work, and Site Tracker really helps with that, to make it more efficient, because there is so much cost in chaos. And actually what Site Tracker does is it gives you control of the data, helps you understand where everything is, helps your contractors on the ground to know what and when they're doing, and then helps you capture data about the reliability of the charge point, so you can continuously be analyzing that data and making better decisions going forward. I would say that right now the return on investment, we're doing quite a lot of work with the Welsh government on that sort of how do you encourage companies like ourselves to deploy charges and to fund charges. you know, it's really helpful to understand the cost structure in all of this, and actually to be able to get private investment money into this sector. There's just simply the not enough. The contracts might not be long enough. The utilization is still not there. So we're at that point where it's sort of on the cusp, I would say, but it really still needs support to get the infrastructure out there, and to then you know, to encourage more people to buy EVs. And as the utilization goes up, then the business case is more sustainable. One of the real challenges there, and from the UK government point of view, there's obviously been lots of flip-flopping on the ZEV mandate, or lots of prevarication. And when the ZEV mandate, you know, it's going to be really important that we get some confirmation of what the ZEV mandate is going to be, because ultimately without that, then there's always going to be that kind of trepidation and stagnation in the market.
I just reinsure you, Lynn, but our biggest competitor is still an Excel spreadsheet. You know, we're still like work with big companies that are still using Excel spreadsheets. We understand that, you know, it's actually, it's something that companies are used to, you know, it's actually quite easy to use, and it's just like quite flexible, and we understand that. But in terms of reporting, exactly as you mentioned, it's an art. And it's usually company that decide to move to a more complete solution is this. It's just like they need to be able to report easily to their investors, easily to government, and say, well, this is where we are, this is what's going on. And even in terms of collaboration, managing 10 projects or managing 10 sites, state EV stations, I think the Excel spreadsheet is actually enough. But if you want to grow, this is where you need to make an investment into like a real solution. Even in terms of collaboration, if you want to be able to onboard contractors and get information faster as well, because obviously you're going to deploy people on the field, and you don't want to wait the end of the day or the end of the week, happens a lot, to get a feedback about, you know, what was the service said, you know, whereas actually did you correct the issue on the station and so on. We need to get the information faster, because we need to be able to supply the information to the customer and say, well, it's backed, you know, it's actually live and you can use it. Also, in terms of single source of truth of information, if you have a solution, not like an Excel, where you can actually capitalize on all the information and feed that back to the investor, to what they call like SPV, special purpose vehicle, which allow like multiple investors to put their capital into like companies, you have a duty to report to those investors. You say like, this is what's going on, this is how many stations that we have, this is how much money we spent. And if you don't have a solution to support this, it could be extremely painful to deal with Excel spreadsheets, documents, zip file that has all the documents. And this is what we see, and this is why companies actually come to SiteTracker today.
I just want to bookend that by saying it's exactly, any company in the EV sector at the moment will be going through cycles of due diligence with investors, and actually having all your data in order, and really being able to, at the touch of a button, say exactly where everything is and at what stage it is just priceless.
So I was talking to a company in south of France, and basically they had to report on a monthly basis to the investors, and they were actually spending the last week of the months to create those reports, to create like those documents, and making sure that they were on time and everything. And we've been able to reduce that by 80%. On the click of the button, you have everything that you need, and it's a SiteTracker. But also, when you start to get like a global solution with a single source of truth of information, you can create reports, and you can get information way faster. You don't need to spend a whole week to create this kind of report. So I feel it's also important in that sense.
Just turning more to the practical side of funding, and you've already talked a bit about it, Lynn. You know, how do financial models, incentives, public-private partnerships, and the question of the profitability of deployments as a business model. Do you want to add anything further to what you said before, or?
Look, every single charge point for me is just like your shop window, right? If it's not working, your shop's closed when someone shows up. It is expensive, and it's getting increasingly more expensive to deliver infrastructure, and therefore the margins are tighter and tighter. There is, from a public point of view, and actually from a personal point of view, collaboration is, everyone is on a net zero journey. Collaboration, whether you're delivering in conjunction with fiber companies, for example, dig once is really important. There are lots of dig once questions around whether there's you can only dig up the road once every couple of years or whatever, but there's an awful lot of value for me in collaborating, and there's a lot more work to do in this space. People are digging up the roads to deliver fiber. People are digging up the roads to EV charging. There's all kinds of other innovation that has to come together from an environmental point of view, but also from a cost point of view. You cannot just deploy this massive load of infrastructure, all these EV chargers, and have them be completely one-dimensional. There's massive opportunities to look at how we monitor air quality and how we do parking sensors and the like. But also, we're about to embark on a program, on an innovation program, where we also look at deploying small cells as well. Sebastian mentioned about connectivity. Even though EV charging is being around for a while, it is still what I like to think of as the Wild West, because there's still so much exciting challenges to solve, and there's still so much innovation. And so from a business case point of view, you have to look at how you can stack more value onto that piece of work that you're doing, financially, but also from an environmental and social value point of view. There's so much more you can be doing with that effort. Otherwise, it literally is just one-dimensional charges, that's it. So for me, it's really critical that we start collaborating with all sorts of infrastructure providers to make it more efficient environmentally and from a cost perspective.
And Sebastian, do you want to add to that?
No, not too much. I completely agree. I think anything that you can add value onto a site, small cells are obviously, an excellent way of doing that. And the operators across the UK are desperate for them to increase their networks. Advertising, and we're seeing quite a few clean air firms come through as well. That I think Pluvo is one of them. They're trying to put their air filters out there and clean the air in cities, train stations, that sort of thing. So how do we build on that and not be as one-dimensional? So I completely agree.
Yeah, the return on investment is going to be important. And if you see it as one dimension, as you mentioned, just to get money from a customer when they want to recharge their vehicle, I don't think it's going to be enough. And what we see more and more often is diversity in how they can use those EV stations to install, for example, like small cell, 5G small cell. And we're talking to BT that actually want to do this, but also anything related to solar. It's something that is also growing. Like clean energy is obviously the future, and a lot of companies are actually diversify their activity to be EV, but also solar company, and how they can actually capture energy, especially in the south. UK might be a little bit challenging at the moment, but in the south to, capture energy, to be able to bring also like Amazon boxes as well. Like if you go and charge a vehicle, maybe you decide to deliver, your boxes or your delivery, maybe into an Amazon box. So just like you use the space of the EV charging station to more than just charging a vehicle, and the ROI obviously out of it, it's going to be important.
And this might be an opportune moment, since you've talked about the technology as well. The questions come in here: is cellular access a mandate? Is powerline communication usable for the place where no cellular tech is available?
I think for us, we have to use it. We haven't got we could technically deploy fibre to the sites, and we are looking at for some of the sites. But again, you've got separate trenching, separate fibre, separate companies, separate costs, all for the fibre. The cheapest way is just to have a 3G, 4G, 5G SIM card on top of the unit that connects you to the sort of the credit card terminals. So yeah, it's the cheapest way for us to do it.
I think that really, Jonathan, then leads into sort of the collaboration. So when you're digging, There are lots of people delivering fibre, so it's really, I'm a big fan of pilots and, you know, collaborating on proof of concepts, and actually we should be looking at how can we provide, how can we maybe utilize fibre or other forms of communication. But Sebastian's right. Today, I mean, we have some sites in remote parts of Scotland which they struggle to get connectivity. So there's a huge opportunity there for us to be collaborating with mobile operators to deploy connectivity at the same time as we're deploying chargers, because users will struggle to get connectivity for anything, not just to charge up. But
and fibre company as well.
Yeah. Yes.
I think we're seeing that for new sites, absolutely. You know, I completely agree. And when we've got a number of sites in the new year that we're deploying alongside, you know, the basic, you know, well, the building structure as well. So we have that opportunity. I think the problem we've got at the moment is, you know, certainly across the sort of Green King estate, some of these pubs have been there for, you know, for decades, and it's the infrastructure has been in place for a long time, and it's building on top of that. But yeah, for new sites, certainly there's a massive opportunity there.
Okay, let's move on to another topic of growth. And as the demand for EVs and charging stations grows, what strategies do you have in place to scale up charging infrastructure rapidly and efficiently? And how are you balancing the need for rapid expansion with ensuring a high quality charging experience for users? And Lynn, I'd like to ask you to go first on that again.
I think that really ties into a lot of what we've talked about. Ultimately, the EV charger is an appliance, and there's a cost to that. We have been lucky enough to partner with some very innovative, forward-thinking counties that want to deploy, you know, county-wide. We take West Sussex, for example, where we're deploying up to 7,000 chargers, and we're able to really plan the use our site selection software to help plan where those chargers should go. And really, the speed that we're going at is only limited by the speed of power. And even from an AC perspective, power is not as big of an issue for me unless we are deploying rapids. The rapid chargers like Sebastian, but there's still that I think everyone would like to be going faster, but there's still an issue in terms of that bottleneck, in terms of the will is there, but maybe not the capacity from councils. One of the things that just from in terms of their legal teams for leases, or you know, many other areas, the highways teams. So there is still a piece of work from a strategic point of view, and Charge UK are really leading on this, is saying, how do we make sure that there are more standard leases, for example? How do we make sure that there's a more standard approach to how we're doing this? Because actually everywhere you go, there's a different set of challenges that you've got. So what we've been trying to do is all of those repeatable challenges, we kind of lift them up and say, okay, here's the power issue, these are the kind of issues we find every time. How do we really work with National Grid, or how do we work with power providers to really improve what's happening here? Maybe we work closer to say, where have you already got power? Let's do that. And then how do we work with you? When you're doing a really large deployment over 5-10 years, you have the opportunity to really work closely and forecast where you're going. So it's not just this kind of, okay, I can deploy it, but I'm waiting for power. The power might not be there for another 6 months. So it's just really trying to work through all of those intersection points that you have, because you can deploy it, but employing resident consultation, how do you really make sure your comms and the industry communicates what this actually means and what it means to residents? How do you make sure that councils have the right legal support? Are there things you can do where you actually have task force in place to really solve some of these big problems, so that all of the charge point operators can move faster? Because I think all of charge point operators would be moving faster than they are right now if it weren't for some of these kind of sticky, tricky issues that we're all trying to work through. And Charge UK for me is charge point operators who are competitors actually coming together and saying, how can we actually solve some of these big issues for all of us while still maintaining our own kind of commercial competencies?
It's about Sebastian.
Yeah, I think on a basic level, we've got a lot of sites that we can see future potential on, sites that we would typically turn from maybe 2 or 4 chargers into a hub. And I think in terms of future proofing that, we often will make sure that there's additional power available at these sites. We'll make sure that there's the ducting in place initially so that we can upgrade quicker when the time comes, when we get newer, faster chargers arriving in the UK. I think the other one is bringing you back to SiteTracker again in terms of how can we improve the speed of delivery, and trying to build that sort of cookie cutter deployment process, with SiteTracker, so that when we get a new site, it goes through exactly the same process as any other site, and we just do the same over and over and over again, which then obviously will improve the speed at which we can deploy, and try and be as data driven as we can in our decisions. But yeah, SiteTracker is certainly helping with that.
And Matt, what are you hearing from your other customers?
Well, just to come back on both comments, first of all, we're back to collaboration. Indeed, I think that in order to complete a project, you need different stakeholders, you need different people to intervene, and obviously local municipalities getting like a permit on time, not waiting for a permit, is also quite important, and sometimes it can take like weeks, maybe like a month to get it. And when you have the permit, you also need to make sure that you don't go over the limitation of the permit, that you don't do the work after that, because otherwise you'll need to get another permit. So getting a solution that helps you to track your permit, to track what's going on, and to get collaboration from people, making sure that you get things on time, is going to be obviously important. Another thing is going to be about metrics. If you want to do things faster, you need to understand how long does it take, because obviously you can't make it like 10% faster if you don't know how long does it take to do something. So having a solution to understand your metrics, like how long does it take to get a permit, how long does it take to do the construction, to get an average time on this and get metrics and say, well, actually our goal for 2024 is to get this process a little bit faster, and how we can make it faster. Having metrics, having a report, dashboard that helps you to make those decisions is going to be important, and this is how you're going to be able to grow faster, install faster, and so on.
Well, that leads nicely into the sort of final session, which is looking into the future trends. So really, I'd like each of you to share what you see as the trends emerging, and the role you foresee of future EV charging infrastructure, and how software can support it. And Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
I suppose trends for me, you sort of have to start somewhere. And I think what we've done, an EV infrastructure, the EV infrastructure that's out there today has really supported the early adopter. I'm lucky enough to have a driveway. I've had an EV for years because I can park it on my drive. I got some solar panels, it's great. But the more deployment now in the public realm, it's really supporting that. But it is what I'm seeing is obviously there's lots of different debates around wireless charging and different uses for that. It's really important when you build a network. It's not like the first thing you deploy on day one is not going to be the same thing you're deploying 10 years later. So for me, it's really understanding how that tech is evolving, how you make sure that you can switch to that new tech or start implementing it as you're still running really fast, and then understand from a business case point of view how much of your legacy estate you need to upgrade. So massive amounts of work there in terms of keeping the momentum, because the industry needs momentum. So it's really making sure that you're keeping an eye and really understanding where you can lead on which parts of the industry. So keeping an eye on innovation, understanding how you fold that into your work and what you're doing. Understand, as I said before, how you can collaborate, because it is absolutely critical from a cost perspective and an environmental perspective that you collaborate with other people doing similar kinds of work. how you can partner up with maybe some of the rapids, maybe some people who want a combination of rapid. It's all about partnering. There's something we haven't talked about, and I think again this is some of the advantages of recording all your data is somewhere reliable. Energy is, without energy, none of this infrastructure means anything. So it's really, for me, the most exciting aspects of this is how are we going to power the charge points? How are we going to give power energy costs? How are we going to actually work with our customers to give them access to cheaper rates, not just because you have a driveway? How are we going to really solve some of those problems? How is vehicle to grids going to go? How is peer-to-peer energy trading going to go? How are distributed microgrids going to be built into the EV charging networks that are being built? All of those things, you're in that space where you're having to build stuff, but you really have to constantly be looking at what's happening and how you fold that into what you're doing and how you really lead on that and on that sort of innovation space. I work with several postdoctoral students who are doing some incredible innovation in the sort of energy space and in the EV charging and energy space. That's really where we need to be, because this is the time over the next 24 months where stuff will happen. Innovation will happen. People are thinking about this, responding to energy prices and all the issues we're going through with there. So it's incredibly exciting for me. But as a builder, you still have to keep building the network. So it's really making space for all that innovation, but not stopping, carrying on delivering and being able to measure how you're delivering and constantly improve that while all this glorious, marvelous innovation is happening and you understand then how you fold that into your business.
Sebastian, what is your perspective on future trends?
I think what we're seeing is that tools and systems are more important than ever. Matt, you mentioned the sort of single source of truth, and that's absolutely critical. And yet there are still hundreds of companies out there that still use Excel to run their deployment programs, and the benefits are huge. I think for the next steps for us, internally and where we're going to go, is more along that automation front. How do we improve the speed between certain milestones and identify those? How do we improve the alerting and the notifications so that things happen quicker? And then after that, again, sticking with that tools and systems, how do we integrate? And we've got 2 integrations that we're planning inside the next 6 months with both finance systems to improve POs, quoting, alerting between our subcontractors, and then from there are other tools and systems that we have to use external systems for with the actual charger manufacturers. And it's how do we integrate with those? How do we get that alerting? How do we track it in one system instead of across 2? How do we improve the speed at which we can fix our sites? How do we improve the speed at which we understand that the site's gone down? So I think that's definitely where it's trending for me. Just improving that element.
And what's your perspectives, Matt?
No, I agree. What we see very often is a demand on more analytics around more reports. I think is going to be important. The process has always been a plan, build, and maintain, and we were very much in the build phase, but obviously now there are actually more stationed on the streets, and you need to maintain it. So you need like different KPIs. Another thing that we have is obviously a global trend is around AI. As we need to be able to use the data of those companies and drive trends and say how we can make things faster based on previous experience. We've been deploying stations for the past 2 years with different contractors, with different companies, with different permitting agency as well. It's like, what if I take this company and this company? Does that make the process faster? So using AI to go through your data and make things faster, and then also find trends in the process in certain area where there's actually more maintenance to do is also important. To allocate people, again, everything is going to be connected. Another trend that I see and we spoke about is obviously combining EV with solar. We have example today of companies that use site trackers, such as like Paradot in Portugal, Iberdrola in Spain, or Dravco in France. And obviously, the cost of electricity is getting more and more expensive everywhere. So if we can actually, lower down the price of electricity by using solar, it's going to be important. I don't think solar would be enough to power a station. It's not, especially if it's a fast one. But if you can reduce the cost of the electricity and to be able to resell the electricity to any other company, the ROI is going to be important. And at the end, this is important. A third trend that I see is obviously, we talk about deployment, but it's also about the digitalization of the field. We're talking about Excel spreadsheet for the project manager. I can still see people on the field that are actually filling a PDF file or a Word file where what they've done, taking pictures, sending picture by email, and so on. And obviously digitalizing, the field, and to be able to create a report or forms, checklist that can be done directly from a tablet or from a phone, and report that automatically, to a project management system and so on. That's a big thing. And the company we work with and the contractor we work with are very much in that sense, because they also have, targets, and they want to be able to report faster and get this information to be able to use that for KPIs. So the digitalization of what we call the field is going to be also like a trend in the next couple of months, couple of years.
On the technology side, there was a question about the potential of using charge points or charging stations as vehicle to grid, and can anyone comment very briefly on that? We're into the last 5 minutes, so in about a minute.
I think you're going to see a tremendous, there's obviously a lot of work done on vehicle to grid at the moment. I think the whole basis, we talk about digitization. If you are methodical about how you're capturing your network, then all of the things that you do, all of the exciting innovation that you add on, it's very easy to fold that into the data to grow your institutional memory about what's actually going on in your network. So V2G, absolutely. Flexibility services, I think someone said, all of that there's a real balance here between software and hardware. You still have to build the thing, right? Physically get out there, go against the laws of physics and try and build it to get over all those things. You think about the 4G network, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when nobody had an app on their phone. Building the 4G network, which incidentally took a couple of years before you could even launch it, just led to an explosion of innovation. And that's really what I think we're going to see. Building this network is going to really lead to an explosion of innovation in that flexibility services, in the relationship you have with customers. Understanding, we're responsible for our utilization. That is really literally like your shop window display. So you have to come up with that flexibility to really give that value to your customers and make them come back.
And just in closing, I'd like to go around one minute from each of you on a key takeaway from today's conversation about the future of EV charging infrastructure and how we can accelerate that deployment. So, Sebastian.
It's been mentioned a lot today. I think the key word, is collaboration. How do we work more efficiently with all of the partners involved with deploying these sites? There's a lot of moving parts right the way up to deployment that are, as Lynn has hinted at, quite painful at the moment, and we need to improve the speed and ease critically of deploying these sites.
Lynn?
For me, my watchword is always bold. You have to be bold. This is a very innovative time, and it's very easy to hesitate and think, what do I do next? It's absolutely the most important time to be bold and to lead. And it's much easier to do that if you have real confidence in what you're building and the data that sits behind it to kind of really help reinforce some of the decisions that you're making.
And Matt?
I agree on the collaboration and the bold. I would add obviously the technology. I don't know any good companies that actually doesn't have like a good CRM to track all their customers and so on. I don't know any good companies, successful company that has not a good sales solution to sales and so on. So I don't know any like company that actually bold and want to deploy faster that doesn't have like a good project management system. So I think technology is going to be important for me.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for your insights, and of course our audience for listening on behalf of Site Tracker and Smart Energy International, and to just remind you that this will be available on demand after the event. And if any further questions, please send them in, and we'll ensure that they're answered. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan. Cheers.